Unity Now is a podcast about Americans from all walks of political, social, and economic life coming together with a willingness to hear different ideas and perspectives about the most pressing challenges of our time. Unity Now is 100% volunteer run and supports the Unity movement at articlesofunity.org. To learn more and become a volunteer, visit articlesofunity.org and check out Brett Weinstein's YouTube page and the Articles of Unity YouTube page for the weekly campfires. As always, please hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Hi, I'm your host, Toby Davis, and today I'm joined by the Reverend Janice Hitchcock. She's a social scientist specializing in human sexuality, trauma recovery, positive psychology, and community integration. As the daughter of a retired aerospace engineer and descendant of a long line of American civil rights activists, abolitionists, farmers, and explorers dating back to the 1600s, she has grown up in the unique position of immersion in our country's history while participating in the development of the technologies that will guide our world's future. A classically trained vocalist and djembe drummer, she is currently researching her master's thesis, The Drum Calls You, Becoming a Djembe Drummer, a Qualitative Study, on the formation and external verification of identity, as well as the healing and unifying effects of African drum culture. Returning to college as a grandmother, Reverend Hitchcock was named an International Distinguished Member of the Year for the Phi Theta Kappa Honor Society. She's been inducted into the Texas Regional Hall of Honor, Psi Beta, Psi Chi, was selected for academic funding by the Terry Foundation, an organization whose mission is to strengthen Texans by helping to lift community leaders and scholars out of poverty, and several other distinctions. She is a Soror Rosae Crucis, holds a Bachelor of Science with honors in psychology with a minor in philosophy from Texas Women's University, an Associates of Arts with honors from Collin College, certificates in business management, medical office specialist, and yoga instruction, and is completing her master's in sociology. Janice currently leads a Thursday night discussion for the Unity 2020 volunteers, where people with radically different worldviews can come together to share their experiences, insights, and ideas for how we can come together as a community to heal the toxic divides within the United States. Oh, and why is she a reverend? Well, Janice explains that during our episode, and it's probably not what you think. I hope you enjoy. Hi, Janice. How are you?
I am well. How are you doing?
Great. Thank you so much for joining us today. I should have said the Reverend Janice, right?
Yeah. Strangely, but yes.
So you were describing that to us kind of before we started recording, how that all came about. Can you go over that real quick again? Why you're the Reverend Janice Hitchcock?
Why I'm Reverend Janice Hitchcock? All right. So I came to college as a grandmother 2 weeks after my first grandchild was born because I wanted to be the next Dr. Ruth. I had, grown up with raising millennials and Gen Z, and I saw that there was just a lot of misinformation and strangeness going on around sex, and I wanted to help people get more balanced in that area in their life. And so as I was going through and getting my psych degree in undergrad, there were too many limits on me. For instance, if you have a license to be a practicing therapist, you aren't allowed to warn people if there's a public figure who's having a psychological problem. And there were also things where while I was studying neuroscience, I was also supposed to be saying that men and women aren't different, which men and women are different.
Whoa, that's controversial. Are you sure?
I know. Yes. We're just going to throw me under the bus right away with the I have male and female children, and I assure you they are quite different from each other. But, I saw that movement coming, and academia laughed about it. They were like, oh, you'll see these generations are exactly the same as all other generations. And there's, you're being hysterical about this. yeah, I take no pleasure in being right about what I was seeing at the time. As far as the Reverend goes, people have always compulsively divulged their secrets and their stories to me. And one of the reasons for being a therapist was being able to have a legal way to protect those secrets that people were telling me. When I decided going to grad school that I needed to follow the data into sociology instead of psych, becoming an ordained minister allows me to protect those personal details that people just compulsively tell me about their life. You know, as long as the Constitution stands, there's no court that can force me to, you know, betray that trust that people just seem to naturally have in me. And although a lot of, you know, strange things have come from that since I, you know, took on that calling of being a reverend. I had a lot of people tease me. It's like, we knew you were clergy. I don't know why you even fought it. But yes, it's not a dogmatic thing. It's very much a, when people come to me for a kind of spiritual healing, I want to be able to uh, let them know that I've done everything I could to protect them.
Yeah.
So,
So, are there situations where you find yourself before you had that, when you find yourself in danger of having to disclose anyone's private information?
well, you know, there were things people will tell me about uh, crimes they've committed.
Mm-hmm.
They will tell me about things that are going on during, you know, divorce proceedings or things like that, where there was always a possibility that I could have been called on to testify. And I'm a bit of a, telling the truth is very important to me. I mean, I feel like if I'm in a situation where I have to lie, I have somehow, it's an intellectual failing on my part.
Hmm.
Um, and so I didn't want to be in a situation where I had to choose between harming somebody
Yeah.
who had come to me for aid, um, and telling the truth. And this gives me a, it's not that I'm going to lie for you, I won't, but I can say this was something brought to me specifically under these, you know, now people can say, Janice, I'm coming to you for spiritual advice and I expect this to go, I call it the vault. I expect this to go in the vault.
Yeah.
And then it's just there. And they have that comfort because they know that I'm not going to betray them, but they have that extra comfort in the fact that nobody can force me to do it either.
Wow. Yeah, that's great. It did that. The only other path to do that is that a lawyer, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, if I was a lawyer or if I was their therapist.
Yeah. Okay.
But you know, being a therapist, you have this really big problem with, you're not supposed to talk about anything you see out in the world unless someone has come to you as a client, while at the same time, you have a legal obligation to warn when you see a potential for somebody to harm another. It's completely conflicted. Every
Yeah.
psychologist in the country should have said this is a textbook case of narcissistic personality disorder. And yet everyone was forced to not do that because of the Goldwater rule, which, you know, yes, you should not make diagnosis by mail about someone whom you've never seen. But there's a big difference between that and recognizing a psychological pattern in somebody who you've seen hundreds of hours of video of. You know, at this point,
Yeah.
every single one of us has seen Donald Trump more than any psychologist has ever seen a patient in their life.
A lot of hours of evidence there. Yeah.
Yeah, whether we wanted to or not.
Right. Well, that's a good segue. So we come here. You're a member of the Unity movement,
Mhm.
and describe what you ended up doing with the Unity movement, which I believe includes a weekly Zoom call recording with a bunch of people to come together. Is that the Uniting People channel on the Slack, I
Yeah,
believe?
Uniting People channel in the Slack on Thursday nights. It's not recorded because we want people to really come in and be able to say whatever they need to
Oh, okay.
say,
Yeah.
right?
So yeah, just a
Um,
live get together.
but it's a live get together. It goes usually for several hours, and it's an in and out kind of thing. It's not generally structured, so it's more like a happy hour or something like that, where you'll have, some people are there at the beginning, some people are there for the middle, some people are there the whole time, some people come at the end. So the conversation, just kind of naturally flows. And what we're really working on is creating a space where people who are extremely different, I mean, and I've talked to people from across the spectrum ideologically in these Thursday night chats, where it's we all understand that we're there in good faith. So if someone says something that may be offensive to you or may make you uncomfortable, it's something that we can actually talk out, and it's not just assumed, oh, this person is on the other team, they're my enemy. It's like we're all on the same team, we're just all very different from each other. And I think, in a lot of ways, if we could generalize that out, if that was all that the unity movement ever did, was manage to create places where people that just have fundamentally different worldviews can come and talk it out, I think that would be, even if we never managed to have a single candidate, if we could do that and have that influence what's the national conversation, um, I really think that would be an amazing gift to the world, not just the United States.
I totally agree. I've even said to my wife before, this idea of unity and these kind of conversations that we always have on this podcast. It's like, should we, once COVID is over and you can actually gather in public, should we maybe have community centers that are, unity community centers that are like churches in a way, but they're just buildings where people come together every every week or so and discuss important topics that are for the community. That could be politics, could be what's going on in religion around that community, whether it's the state or the city or the county, whatever it may be. And through that, you can expose people to different ways of discussing things besides being on Twitter or Facebook or wherever their social media habits bring them. And then you could expose them to maybe listening to other ideas of political candidates. And so maybe we would have never gotten this mess in the first place, having Trump or Biden.
Right. Yeah, I don't think we would have. If we had actually been talking to each other on a community level, and instead of doing we're going to put up whatever for team blue and team red, and the point is to totally crush team red or to totally crush team two, team blue, sorry, if that wouldn't work out. We need
Yeah.
progress people who are seeking to adapt to the world and to move things forward. And we need people who are bringing forward the hard won lessons of our ancestors. Um, there are some parts of the system that we do it that way because every time we don't do it that way, it's failed. And to
Yeah.
be able to have a balance, have some radical moderates, I guess, who are interested in tying those things together. That we see. I live in Texas, And so our politicians are very red, even though the state is obviously, we've proven the state is purple. But all of the talk coming from our leaders is very right, like extremely right. But you see the same problem with California. California, 40% of the state is Republican, but all you hear from their leaders are very left ideas. You end up disenfranchising, almost half of the state when you do something like that. And obviously that's not working out.
All those are great points. So back up a minute and tell us how you got to the unity movement. You were describing that before we started recording. Some of it has to do with your attention to politics throughout your life, and some of it has to do with your biology background, and that's why you followed Brett Weinstein, I believe.
Yeah.
Go through all that for us again, if you could.
Sure. Well, so since I don't know which parts of my bio you have said previously, the first member of my family was born in what would become the United States in 1603. My family was part of the founding of the colonies. My sixth great grandfather wrote sassy letters to George Washington and Thomas Jefferson about the fact that, hey, we're talking about this freedom thing, but you guys still own slaves. Isn't that an issue? You could be, maybe you should be an example. And we were a part of the Western expansion. After we made it legal to free our slaves, that's what's happened. There's actually still a town in Virginia where the land is owned by the former slaves there. It's very, that's a whole other story. But we went all the way across. We went all the way across to Texas, came to Texas when it first became a state, moved on to expand out to California. Now I'm back in Texas. So, the United States, this experiment that we're doing has been a big part of just my family history. And so it was always expected that I would attend to these things. When I was a little girl, I remember watching the Nixon hearings. I was born in 1970, so I was little at the time. I watched the whole, Jimmy Carter and the Reagan era, and just, watched C-SPAN when I was home with my 4 children. I was actively involved in the PTA. I've advocated for legislation, in Austin and at the local level and all of those kinds of things. That's just been a part of the expected duty.
Yeah.
That I would be a good citizen of the United States is just a family expectation. And Dad was an aerospace engineer. So I've had a working computer in my house since I was born in 1970. And so I've been a part of watching all of this happen, my whole life too. And well, you asked me about something else besides the family.
Well, this all brought you to this point. With the Unity 2020 movement, which is now the Unity movement without 2020. Yeah. So how did you exactly get here then through all that? I'm not surprised. I don't think anyone would be surprised.
Well, it was that I was starting to get into a lot of trouble with the men and women are different thing in the field of psych and in sociology. I almost lost my place in my program with conflicts. Like I said, I was using a data point of there was a question on the General Sociological Survey, which is a survey of the United States that they do every year, and they compile data. And I was just in a stat class saying, I believe that people who answered this question right, does the father's DNA determine the sex of the offspring? I said, if they answered that question right, then they would be more likely to support comprehensive sex education. My professor's response was, well, you wouldn't say that they know that, because you would have to say they believe that.
Versus being empirically true
Yeah,
biologically.
versus being empirically true biologically, because I don't have any Y chromosomes to pass on to my offspring, and therefore I can't create sex variants.
Wow.
Right? As a female, I can only pass on female, and all sex difference, you default female. And all sex difference comes from that, little tiny Y,
Right.
makes all the divergence, right? Um, and I got into a lot of trouble for
Wow.
for that. And so I watched what happened to Brett and Heather. And I'd already been, I think I'd watched what happened to James Damore when, Google asked him why he thought, things weren't, going well
Yeah.
with women. And he's like, hey, maybe women don't really care about these kinds of things.
Could be freedom of
Could be
choice.
freedom
Yep.
of, could be that women prefer tinkering with humans over tinkering with mechanical devices for a reason. And just watching that just catastrophic event, especially from somebody who was clearly not a hater of any of these groups, right? Watching
Right.
the left just rip this guy apart. I'd seen the same thing happen with David Buss. David Buss wrote Evolution of Desire, which is the um, evolutionary psychological text that had really inspired me to come back to school. And
Wow.
he had done, there are tens of thousands of people in his data set at this point. And, I was always seeing this pushback, strangely, from, the feminist movement on, just these basic short-term and long-term mating strategies in males in relation to females. Things were very simply, this is how this particular kind of primate works, that we're being seen as no, we've just socially constructed the whole thing. And I think that whole social construction thing is difficult because yes, we do make things happen through our socializations. Obviously, I'm a sociologist, I study that. There are things that are just biologically true about us that in no way does me being a woman, born as a woman, invalidate the experience of anybody with sex dysphoria, you know, or that
Yeah.
Brett was upset that they were going to exclude white students and faculty from a day as a form of punishment, that him seeing that as being a potential problem, um, that doesn't mean that he didn't believe that his Black students or whatever color student had legitimate problems because of where they were coming from. And it just seemed like there was that zero
Right.
sum. Oh, you either say these specific things or off with your head.
Yeah, and I don't know if we need it. I think most of the UnityNow listeners and viewers would know who Brett is, but to give just quick context, you're talking about Brett Weinstein, his
Mm-hmm.
wife Heather, and his incident in I believe 2007, 2013.
Wasn't
I'm thinking
wasn't seven.
7. Was it 7 years ago then? Maybe it wasn't in 2017
Yeah,
then potentially.
I was already in college. I was already really getting the pushback in the field of psych with the word. I was actually studying sexual dysfunction with
Hmm.
the person who I was evaluating whether or not they would be my thesis advisor if I continued in the program and got my master's in psych. And I was studying sexual dysfunction, and he was asking me questions. And he said, what would you do about somebody who is experiencing sexual dysfunction based upon what I'd researched? And I said, well,
Hmm.
obviously it would depend on whether or not they were a man or a woman. And he said, I can't put anything gendered in any of this work. Uh,
Wow. Yeah. I tell you, I just happened to be at my annual physical this past week, and something that just jumped out at me that, I'm from Indiana. I'm doing this from Indianapolis. So I think, kind of far behind when it comes to a lot of this stuff, but we're catching up. And so I was asked to fill out a demographic piece of paper, and they said this is something we have to do annually, which I think I remember, but I think it's been a few years or a couple years at least since I had my annual physical. But I looked at it, and there were, of course, new questions. So some of them were my preferred pronouns, no
right.
problem with that. Some of them were my how I identify right now, no problem with that. But then when I saw the question about how I or what gender I was assigned at birth,
Yeah.
that's where I stopped for a second and said, well, yeah, here we go. This is this whole conversation that, folks like you and Brett have been talking about for a long time. It's not really, you can't use that word, can you? In this
Well,
science?
now there is a small group of people, intersex people who are
Okay.
genetically
Yep, that's
both,
fair.
right? Not
You're right.
trans
You're right.
people, but intersex people. They are,
Mm-hmm.
based upon how their doctors work and things like that, or people that were hermaphrodites. And so, perhaps the doctor picked for them and, made them into, their sex organs into whatever it was that was more closely aligned. For those people, that assignment at birth makes sense. Uh,
Yeah. Okay.
but
That's fair.
for 98% of us, none of that applies, right?
I mean, it's born
Right.
with.
You
Yeah.
were, I've got my two exes, you've got an XY, I'm a female, you're a male, I make eggs, I,
Mm-hmm.
you know, epigenetically change when I have a new offspring, all of those things that make me female. But even that, intersex is very different because they can be for any number of genetic reasons, right? For genetic variants. And then you also have what we call the trans community, but because it's such a small community and they're from so widely dispersed, they're also very different from each other. You have straight men who simply are sexually excited by dressing as a woman and being in that space. You have people who have sexual dysmorphia, who feel that they are in the wrong body, and I cannot just, the suffering that must cause a person to feel like you don't belong in the body that you're in. I can only
Yeah.
imagine just how painful that is. But there's even variance within that, and I think we do them a disservice by pretending that you know these all fall under T. You're just T, and
Yeah.
therefore, because you're a T, I know everything about you. I was like, that is not my experience. I know way more trans people than your average human. And one thing about them is that they are all very unique kind of individuals that um, what works for one and what would really help one is not necessarily what would help the other. And a vast majority of them, they just want to live their life as the other. I haven't run across very many trans people who I've had discussions with who want to end gender, who want me to stop
Hmm.
saying that I breastfed my babies, or that I'm a mother, that it's not okay for me to say that I'm a mother, that I'm supposed to say I'm the birthing parent, or that I can't say that I'm a woman, I'm a person who bleeds. I run across those people on Twitter, but I never run across
Yeah.
them in any discussion. And I go to spaces where people of every kind come all of the time. And I'm very open to hearing that, and I just don't.
Yeah, you touched on how you grew up with computers, and you mentioned earlier you framed it as this coming, and I think what you mean is our divisiveness and social media, and probably everything you saw in The Social Dilemma on Netflix, if you had a chance to watch that. And yeah, so that's interesting that you talk about that. That's what we see, right? You only see the extremes of society on social media for the most part. That's not even close to a representation of actual real people, real Americans.
Yeah, you have to fight the algorithm. I didn't join Twitter until April of this year because I was trying to figure out. I was watching the COVID briefings from the White House, and the president of the United States was saying things where I went, who is giving him that information? That is wildly inaccurate. Where is that coming from? Right? And so I bit the bullet and I went on Twitter. Now, when I started my Twitter account, the first thing I did was follow all of our intelligence agencies and follow the GOP on down to my local and the DNC on down to my local. So
yeah, I follow both the political parties. I should have done the intelligence agencies. That's a good tip.
Because we do have a lot of them. And they, they don't post very, very often, but when they do, it's usually interesting things. And then I follow the CDC and stuff like that. But it was very easy to discern what was going on once I was on Twitter going up to the briefings, because then, although I do not follow Donald Trump, I can obviously go look at him. That you could see what he was doing on Twitter, because he only follows 50 people. And so you had like the thing with the bleach. Everybody's like, what is going on with this bleach and this light and all of that? Well, there was a small church group down in Florida that was selling a kind of bleach cure, who had all been writing letters to the president. He had been looking at, because he shares stuff, he'd been looking at these articles and things from people that were doing that. So he's just flying off the cuff because he doesn't realize you are the president of the United States and everybody takes what you're saying seriously. They're not, off standing at the podium in the White House giving a briefing to the United States is not the time to brainstorm, right?
Right.
We're all freaking out. Yeah. You're supposed to be making us not freak out.
And he's throwing out ideas like this is a discussion with 700 million people.
Yeah, this is a discussion with 700 million people. Yeah.
And what's his Twitter following? 80, almost 90 million people. Right. I
don't know how many of those are bots. Yeah. I think that's bots.
Yeah.
That's the problem. Because you don't know when you're on Twitter, you don't know if you're talking to a Nobel laureate or a 14-year-old boy who's mad at his mom. And it could be anyone.
Yeah, it could be anyone.
And so if you have somebody who's addicted to Twitter and addicted to the attention, who is listening to anybody who's saying what he wants to hear, without any regard to whether or not that person has spent any time learning about what they're saying, how could that not be a problem? I don't care what party they're a member of. That's a problem.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think I've always, and maybe this is silly, maybe I'm naive, I've always kind of looked at him on Twitter, and the fact that he's doing it all himself is like the problems are what he's tweeting, not necessarily that his time on the platform is giving him time in the algorithm and whatever he's seeing or choosing to see or choosing to follow or whatever is getting suggested to him. So that's a very good point. So we have a president who is I think a lot of Unity movement members have agreed he's a symptom of our problems in the political system and not the solution. But he's also then showing symptoms of our social media and tech giant problems. He's an example of it. Is kind of what you're saying
Yeah.
there, right? That he's stuck in
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
that
He's
rabbit
stuck in
hole.
the rabbit hole. He's guided by whatever is in front of him. He's really does just, there are dangers of only living in the moment. And that is, what he's doing. If I'm just going to base my worldview on what I'm doing today with whatever I can pull up on Twitter, and if I'm looking at it without a critical eye, I'm not being skeptical, just accepting it based upon the fact I follow this person, so everything they say is accurate, and never going down and doing any research on whether or not it's true, then if I was doing that, I would sound like a crazy person too.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm curious now, given all you've talked about in your family history, which is very interesting, how connected you are to how deep your family goes and where they come from in the 1600s. So tell me how you see. So we're recording this on Monday, the 23rd of November, which we're hoping to get this published by the next day, the 24th, because we wanted to talk about the actual current election results. So how do you see where we are in the election results with this election, given your background, your history, your commitment to staying involved in politics and seeing what's going on all the way back to the 70s? Like, where do you see us? Is it over? Should Trump just concede? Did Biden actually win it? Do we know any of that yet? What are your thoughts?
Well, I have seen no evidence to suggest that Joe Biden did not win the 2020 election. I've seen a lot of, there's some of these anomalies. Like one of the things in Georgia that happened was they had, different SIM cards in which one district the information was loaded onto, and two made it on, but one glitched out and didn't. And so like 3,000 votes just went missing. That kind of thing happens in every election. Nobody's just been paying attention to it before. I was a weirdo watching C-SPAN.
Right.
Lots of people have no idea that, what C-SPAN even is. That, when I'm watching that, I'm watching, I'm listening to the Supreme Court deliberate. Back in the day when senators actually debated bills on the floor, I watched those kind of things. But should he concede? Even the Republican national security advisors are saying that it is a threat to our national security for Donald Trump to continue to say that he has won the 2020 election. You're seeing strange things, like now his supporters are saying they're going to go after the Republican Party in Georgia. Like his supporters in Georgia are saying they're going to go after the Republican Party in Georgia, and a lot of them aren't going to vote for Republicans, which is a big deal for the Republican Party, right? Because that means you're no longer the majority party in the Senate. That's basically going to, cut the legs out from under Mitch McConnell. And, the ironic thing is it's going to be his own party doing it. I am very concerned that if everyone loses faith in the integrity of our elections, that we are going to have a civil war that I'm not sure that our country will survive, because this isn't the same. This isn't like slavery when the North decided we're going to end slavery, and, the South is like, that's going to, that's going to throw us into poverty if we do that. But you had the Mason-Dixon line. We don't have the Mason-Dixon line. If the country people start fighting the city people, or you end up having it split by, heaven forbid, by race, that's going to cause chaos in a way that we have strategically done to other countries, but we've never allowed to have done to us.
Yeah, I agree in the potential problem or the potential outcome in a civil war. And you're right. The states are spread out and are so different than they were from the last civil war, that the civil war would happen in, at your neighborhood level almost, across the street could be
Well, sure. And
warring
not only
factions.
that, but you're going to line up.
And
You would line up in a field.
yeah,
There'd be less people than go to a football game, lined up in a field, and they would take breaks for dinner. Do you really think that's going to happen if we start fighting each other now? No. Are they going to let people come in and take, the wounded out? I just don't see that we are not, strangely, we are not as civilized about such things as we were back then.
Right. Yeah. It's not just to line up and, 3, 2, 1, shoot. War is a lot different, and what we all think of war is so much different. But I see it this way. I see it if the people that would go to war for Trump, thinking he was elected but didn't get was not given the presidency because, Biden stole it or the Democrats stole it. If they don't see these lawsuits or this claimed evidence, if they don't see all these things play out, then it doesn't matter, what actually did or did not happen. Then I think we're going to see that potential for civil war out of folks like that. Like you had, I think it was called the Oath Keepers, the largest militia in the country, said something to the effect of that they would not recognize Biden as president, and they have 30,000 plus members. Now you could, of course, take that out of context and try to decide what they mean by not recognized, but you can take that all the way down that path of, could they be roaming the streets,
Right.
with their guns drawn and, not, trying not to follow any state or local laws or things like that. So I see it as, if we don't allow this to play out, meaning what I'm saying is, we don't know if Biden won. I don't know if we know that for sure until the states certify the results in the electoral college votes, and the states have until December 8th to have all grievances kind of taken care of. And I try to follow as much as I can people that are somewhere in the middle. So I'm on Twitter, I'm seeing Fox News and CNN and the likes of those, the mainstream media, the left and the right, but I also follow Real Clear Politics, The Hill Rising with Crystal and Sagar, and then Tim Pool, actually, funny enough, is somebody that I pay attention to. And what he's been saying for the past week or so is kind of the same thing, is that there is some evidence of fraud. Is there evidence of widespread fraud? Not necessarily. Is there evidence of millions of votes being overturned in the Dominion voting system, according to Sidney Powell? Well, at least not yet. I mean, and I don't know if you saw the news just today or yesterday that now the Trump legal team has disavowed her or has said that she's not a member of the team,
crazy
whatever
woman,
that means.
But you'll keep rooting.
Right. So, and they have a couple weeks, and she has a couple weeks to supposedly show this evidence. Well, okay, let's see it. Let's see what you got. But if it comes out to nothing, then I say, yeah, Biden won, and it's official at that point. And then the people that would potentially be out roaming the streets, I hope, would have everything they need to not do that. That's my hope and my thought, at least.
I am perfectly fine with playing it. I think we should make sure that our elections are run effectively. I mean, obviously, because there will be, in any game, there will be people who cheat, right? Or try to cheat.
That's a great, simple way to put that.
Scale.
Yep. Right. Yeah. You could be rock, paper, scissors. You could be chess, checkers, football, outback.
There are
sharks any game.
Pool. Yes.
Any game.
Yes, there are. But my concern is that with as unstable as Donald Trump has been lately, he when he is criticizing people, those people are getting death threats from his followers. And a governor, there was a plot to kidnap a governor of the United States, and the president of the United States did not come out and say, we will not have that here. And my concern is, I actually think that Donald Trump will become more dangerous if the vote is certified and Biden wins than he is now, because he has every reason to. He needs to hold on to power, or things will not necessarily go well for him. And I talk to people. I talk to people on the extreme right who have told me they can't wait. They can't wait for the shooting to start. They can't wait to school these libs. And I have had people on the left who are tired of these, racist, authoritarian, totalitarian, fascist, whatever, who are also gearing up. I think that there are people on both sides who are concerned. I'm extremely concerned that the president is calling people to the White House, telling them to change their votes and their rulings for him. That's not something that should be happening. Neither contestant should be telling the judges, I need you to agree with that I won, regardless of what happened.
Right.
And there is a possibility that could happen. I mean, there is a legal avenue for the Republican state houses to just decide to throw out the will of the people and send Republican electors in states that Biden won to the Electoral College. I mean, technically speaking, the Electoral College doesn't even have to choose between Trump and Biden. They could pick they could just go, hey, Janice Hitchcock's going to be president of the United States. And that is how it would be.
Right.
So, that uncertainty that regardless of who won the vote, that there's still a possibility. We've had several elections where the winner of the popular vote did not become president of the United States. But we haven't had electors who voted in bad faith. But the system was set up with ethical people being in charge in mind.
Yeah. I noticed. I was preparing for this, and I kind of was seeing what you're talking about on Twitter, and as funny as that may be, given what we just talked about, and you had shared a video, I think it was from 2016, and there were actors talking about what they should have done back then in the Electoral College and vote not for Trump, or, I mean, at the very end, a lot of them said that Trump is not the person they should vote for in some of the characteristics he had, but they laid out a plan for what Electoral College voters should be voting for. In
my opinion, that's fine.
Yeah, and
my Twitter. I never think of people reading my Twitter, but obviously they do. That I believe that the Electoral College was put in place to prevent a demagogue and someone wholly unqualified to be president from becoming president. And in 2016, I believe that the Republican electors should have said that Donald Trump was not qualified to be president, and they should have picked someone else. Not necessarily Hillary Clinton, but that they should have picked somebody who was actually qualified through not just as a politician, but had the stability of mind to do the job effectively. That is what I believe that they should have done. But since they didn't, you
Hmm.
know.
Yeah, I mean, I know what you're saying there. It's like almost they should have taken on the unity characteristics and vote for somebody that's capable,
Yes, that's
courageous,
exactly what I
patriotic,
think that the Electoral
right?
College should have
Sh-
done, is not just picked this one. They had a there are many Republicans who are honorable people who care about the future of the United States that they could have put in his place. Yes.
Did did Trump defeat any of them in the Republican primary that year? Any of the ones you're
Um,
referring to?
well, even though we fundamentally disagree on some things, I believe that John Kasich is an honorable man. I would have
Okay.
uh, I would have I would have voted in a contest between Hillary Clinton and John Kasich. I would have voted for John Kasich. In a contest between even Mitt Romney and Hillary Clinton, I would have voted for Mitt Romney instead. I voted for Hillary Clinton over Donald Trump because before he began to run for president, Donald Trump was the textbook example of narcissistic personality disorder that I used in my work in undergrad.
Interesting. So I've talked about this many times on this podcast and my own podcast that I voted for Trump, but I did so as part of
Right?
Team Red, Team Republican. That whole mindset of us versus them. I'm part of my group. You're part of your group. Anybody in that group is evil and
Right.
bad, and I don't need to listen to them. Blah blah blah. Because I'm in Indiana and I fell into what a lot of people can in Indiana, the Republican echo chamber of media outlets, whether it's talk shows, radio shows, and it's interesting for you to say that you didn't vote for Trump because of your sort of diagnosis
Well,
of him, right? Of his
yeah, I mean, it's pathological
narcissism.
narcissism. And I would expect if I was teaching an
Yeah.
intro to psych class, or especially an abnormal psych class,
Mm-hmm.
I would expect that a student in my class would be able to recognize such an, I mean, every one of the criteria. He meets every one of the criteria, and you don't have to meet all of them for diagnosis. I'm not diagnosing him as much as, recognizing him. I recognize this,
Yeah.
if there was a test and you wanted to show video of somebody with narcissistic personality disorder, this is a great one. And not only that, but his whole family history and everything else, leads up to this is how they're made, you know, and his inability
Yeah.
to empathize. People think of sociopaths as just they're all bad people, which they aren't.
Hmm.
They're definitely not all bad, unethical people, but they're also blind. I mean, imagine if you really couldn't read my expression. If you really couldn't tell how I felt about
Okay. Yep.
something by watching me say it. If you were blind to that
Yeah.
entirely, you wouldn't be able to tell. You can't tell if I'm angry. You can't tell if I'm being aggressive. All you're going to see is the very overt kind of things. And so that
Hmm.
inability to see that broader picture of society, you can be that way for some things, but president of the United States, I don't think that that's one of them. And we've had sociopaths as president of the United States before. I mean, Andrew Jackson was not exactly the nicest person in the world.
Yeah. Well, I asked that because I'm curious what your take was on Hillary then. And was your vote sort of the whole lesser of the two evils vote, or, you know, what did you think?
I uh, I think Hillary Clinton is an example that you can be an incredibly competent person and also not a good person.
Hmm.
I think that, I mean, she's one of the most qualified people to ever run for president, just in, looking at her resume, right? And of
Yeah.
course, it excites me. I have 3 daughters. I have a I'm excited at the prospect of, saying that, women can't be really women. We've had plenty of female leaders in this country who had, influence, who weren't necessarily president, but Eleanor Roosevelt, Nancy Reagan was basically president after Ronald Reagan had his cognitive decline. So we've had very competent women
Yeah.
leading. But my problem with her was a couple of things. When, her relationship with Bill and with Bill's mistresses, it seems from the outside and the way things were happening that they had their understanding with each other. And she didn't care about those kind of things. She cared about nation building. She cared about social engineering. That's what she cared about above this. And her partnership with him was not affected by these little side things that he was doing. However, she also went after and sought to destroy these women that apparently she didn't care about. And when people brought this up, she never stepped up. I wanted to see her step up and say, my relationship with my husband is my relationship with my husband, and it has absolutely nothing to do with me being competent to do this job. Yes, my husband is a horn dog, and he always has been. And yes, does that cause me a lot of fuss and bother? But it's not going to prevent me from doing this. And if she had come out with that, I would have had just so much more respect for her and who she was. But it just seemed like she didn't care about that. She wasn't talking to women. And not only that, but she was very much like Trump in that she's caught in the algorithm, but her algorithm was the polls. So she would alter whatever it is that she had to say, or her view or her talking points would change based upon whatever the marketing people were telling her she needed to say. And there was no genuineness to the way she was doing things. So, it never came forward where she would say, I understand this idea is popular, but I kind of have a different opinion about that because blah, 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 blah. That's what I wanted to see, and I never saw. So yes, the reason that I voted for someone who, she's a war hawk. Russia really hated her. We would have had a lot of different kinds of conflict with the world if she had been president, and conflict in the United States because there are a lot of people who don't think women can be president. There were all kinds of reasons why this was going to be problematic. And then, with Joe Biden, who I did vote for, I voted to fire Donald Trump. I did everything I could, including joining the Unity movement, to prevent the Democratic Party from having Joe Biden as their candidate. When they were beginning to float him again, before he even ran, I was talking to my Democratic friends and saying, please don't do this. Don't do this. If he runs, the DNC is going to get behind him, and all of these other people are going to get pushed out of the way, and they're just going to put him forward. And that's what's going to happen. And then we're going to have this. You could have these competent people, these, anti-corruption people. Elizabeth Warren may not be the perfect candidate. She may make slips, but I do believe she's anti-corruption. I've watched that woman in hearings, and, she's very anti-corruption. Or, you have this whole sea of competent people, Cory Booker is competent. I don't agree with everything he says, but I believe he's competent and that he cares about the United States. But instead, they went with now we have these two old men, one who I've already talked about his issues. Joe Biden had 3 brain aneurysms that happened during the time his first run for president. He had 3 brain aneurysms and 2 surgeries. I've followed his career. Obviously, he's been a prominent public figure in the United States for my lifetime. And I see the cognitive decline. I've worked with seniors, helping them, maintain their cognitive function, get their life together after they've had a catastrophic loss, that kind of thing. And I know how quickly cognitive decline can come. And we had Reagan, and we went for a while without having a real president with a committee taking care of stuff for him. And I don't want to see that happen again. I had a lot of people who were voting for Biden tell me that they didn't expect him to go through the first 4 years, but they were firing Trump, right? Even with Unity, I mean, one of the reasons that I jumped on board was if we could give people a real alternative. If there was, I think that, all of the polls that said Joe Biden was beating Donald Trump, I believe a lot of that was not Trump. Not Trump won the 2020 election. That's what's happened, is not Republicans decided to fire Trump too. Yeah. You see it in the voting in Texas. Fort Worth, Texas went for Joe Biden. Fort Worth, Texas is not a bastion of left-wing radicalism. That's cowboy country.
No.
And, I don't think it's all the Californians moving to Texas that made that happen. Collin County, where I live, which is very red, almost went for Biden. It was extremely close. And so what that's telling me, because all of the Republicans still won here, and they won by larger margins than Trump did, is that there were a lot of people on the right, conservatives and other people, who said, we just can't have this anymore.
Yeah, you're right. And you said something there that I probably didn't even look surprised at, but I am surprised that I've never heard of it, but maybe it is common knowledge. So Joe Biden had 3 aneurysms.
He actually, one of so in 1988, when Joe Biden was running for president, he was obviously having difficulties, and he talked about this a little bit, but you've got to go look back and see, he talked at conferences about traumatic brain injuries and things like that after like late 80s, early 90s. Because he said, he's even said that he wished he had known that he had the brain aneurysms before he started running for president in 88, because it was kind of a waste of time. Because he had one surgery where one of them was handled, and then he ended up having to have a second surgery, but one actually ruptured prior to surgery. And wow. I don't know about common knowledge. I mean, if you're not a nerd like me and you go look up all of the times Joe Biden won, because it's not like this is his first time to run for president. I voted against Joe Biden before too. I voted for John Kerry instead of Joe Biden back in the last time that he ran. But yeah, it's well documented. I mean, anybody can Google Joe Biden brain aneurysm, and you'll get the New York Times stories from 1988, and his recovery from surgery. And then I can't remember what kind of world conference. It was something about traumatic brain injuries that he went to and spoke about it. But when I brought up those questions, when I brought up the handsiness, the hey, you're Me Tooing, and yet you're not having a problem with this, He seems to have trouble distinguishing women who want to be touched
Yeah.
and women who don't. I actually had someone who was, I don't know if they worked for the Biden campaign or they were just a volunteer for the Biden campaign, tell me that I was a bad rape survivor who was an embarrassment to all rape survivors because I was questioning Joe Biden's respect for women's space. Yeah.
Holy crap.
I got a lot of ugly from the right with obviously the things that I have said about Donald Trump. I did not expect the kind of
Yeah.
ugly I've gotten from the left.
Well, I mean, it doesn't surprise me. Like, so I admittedly was in a rabbit hole in 2016, right? In the Republican rabbit hole. Now on Twitter and social media and those sort of things, and YouTube especially, I still follow a lot of those outlets. Breitbart News, a newer one, but he's really come to fruition here this year is Dan Bongino, who is a former Secret Service agent. He is all in Team Trump, and he's now invested in Parler, the kind of the anti-Twitter social media movement. And I haven't heard anyone mention in any of their rants about, Biden's cognitive decline. No one, to my knowledge, has mentioned the aneurysms as a way to prove where it's coming from, or even, suggest that it's coming from there.
I was kind of surprised too.
So I'm really surprised.
I would have thought that they would have, that I would have seen more of that from the right, because basically what I would hear is somebody would bring it up, they'd say cognitive decline, and then everybody would just say, oh, you're being ageist, and then that was the end of the discussion, right? As if humans don't have cognitive decline as they approach 80. I mean, my dad's IQ is 4 standard deviations above the mean, and he doesn't think that somebody in their 70s should be president of the United States, including him.
Wow. Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, you guys are you're not dumb people, that's for certain. And especially after talking to you for a while, and having your bio before this, I mean, so, but other people, of course, would call you ageist and call him ageist, and ageist. You're not allowed to say those things. And
totally self-hate.
Yeah. even at 73. Yep. Well, where are we headed? So you think this is going down a path that's a really bad one? I think we could be headed there as well. I mean, are we headed there inevitably? There's no way to avoid this, or can we avoid this in this election results fiasco?
I don't know. If we get to this point and we find a way to step back, I think we'll be the first civilization that I know of that managed to do it. We are so divided. I mean, after the election, when I put out something on Facebook that basically said, regardless of who you voted for, if you are a person who cares about the flourishing of the United States, I still want to work with you. And I know other people did that too. And the hate came from, how dare you want to make peace?
Yeah.
How dare you want to make peace with racists? How dare you want to make peace with these people who want to burn down our cities? How dare you, even think about talking to these awful people? You've got to just cut all of these people off, as if half the country is just going to stop talking to the other half, and that's going to be cool. There's that concern, and I'm concerned with, from all prior history and evidence, Donald Trump is incredibly spiteful. And my concern is when he decides that we did vote him out of office, that he will make us pay in any way that he can make us pay. And it doesn't take a large group of people to cause a great amount of destruction. I mean, to take it out of political realm, you think about, you know, Heather and Brett were talking about, sex, and it's funny how, there's something we really need to, get a grip on. But you think about like rape in the United States, 25% of women by the time they could have graduated from college, and 20% of men by the time they're old enough to graduate college have been sexually assaulted in some way or another. And that sounds awful, right? And so you look at the rest of the world and you realize that's an amazing number.
Yeah.
That it's only 25% of our female population is fantastic.
Okay.
It's almost 80 in Egypt. So, that's a good number. But serial rapists are, from the studies that I've seen, serial rapists are only about 10%. So you figure that other than like a one-off date rape, strange kind of things going on, in marriage or in relationships or whatever, other than that, you've got 10% of the male population potentially wrecking all of the havoc that we see. And yet we are treating 100% of the male population as if all of you are potential rapists, because in that attempt to defend from the 10%, how do you differentiate, right? It's not like, they're blue or something. You can't just tell by looking at somebody, right?
Yeah.
And so if we've got a small group of people, if we're all sitting on a powder keg and you have a small group of people that want to set that on fire, you don't need a big group of people to suddenly cause disruption, especially with as broken apart as we are into all of these different groups. It's not just one side or the other. There are factions within each side, as you see, like in Georgia, with the Trumpians now going after the Republican Party. We're going after the judge in Pennsylvania who threw out the last Trump case was a well-respected conservative judge who's a member of the Federalist Society. And they're treating his ruling as if he is AOC.
Yeah. And I think throughout with prejudice, if we're talking about the same case, meaning he can't submit it the same way again. They can only appeal it.
Oh,
the judge thought it was that bad of an argument.
I can't even believe you're doing this garbage in my court. And he was very much aware of the danger to the republic that comes from he called it frivolous. Bringing frivolous lawsuit in this matter was a danger to the republic. He was mad that that he was expected to go along with that as a matter of party loyalty. I mean, he would have had to throw his integrity out the window because they weren't presenting any evidence in the case.
Yeah.
It was just, we say so.
Well, I don't know if we're going to be okay or not.
I know
we talked at the onset,
I seem like a nice person, don't
possible.
I? We're all going to die.
Yeah.
But the thing is that regardless of how it's going to go, my personal take on this is that the republic isn't going to crash and burn because I didn't try to save it. And I do think that is the only thing that's going to save it, is that those of us who do feel that patriotic attachment to our nation over whatever team, whatever the people in your life tell you that you're supposed to be doing. If you're saying, okay, wait, yes, there are some horrible people in this group, but these horrible people are also Americans, or that maybe people are responding in this way because there's something legitimately being done to them. And we need to, we're not going to figure out what's wrong unless we actually sit down and talk. back to the very beginning of what we were talking about, I do think that is the only thing that's going to save us. Having conversations, not just, we have, I'm sure we have ideological disagreements about things, but that,
could be, yeah.
We can come together to try to work it out. And we are hitting the brakes with, that mob mentality coming up that we're just going to go at. We have to take a breath and step back. But for people who haven't grown up a nonconformist, I think that it's been very difficult because, I had people who have, shared my stuff on Facebook when I was criticizing Trump, who were all about, I was the most brilliant woman they'd ever heard from, and they can't believe this. And here, look at all this information and proof. Who the second I was pointing that critical eye on their candidate were just as ugly to me as they would be to somebody who was their legitimate enemy. And
yeah. And you made a point earlier about how if I couldn't see your face, even without your video and only with your audio, then so much context is lost in what you're reacting to and how you're saying things. But in social media world, we're missing both of those, the voice and the video. And who knows, even if you said anything that could be in a gray area and could be converted one way or the other, and for both sides, they still don't get what your intention was, how you were saying it, even if you put it in all bold or something.
Like characters, or my
so much is lost there in translation
on the way off to Twitter. And then it's gone, right? I have typos all over the place in my social media because of that. But yeah, I mean, you don't know their age, you don't know their experience, you don't know where they're coming from. And people make these very rapid assumptions about, where they are. I'm a Nazi or a commie, sometimes in the same thread, quite often in the, especially now. And you've got, I'm a TERF, and I'm like, I didn't even know the feminists would take me. That's awesome.
Yeah, and shame on those people that use words like Nazi and communist. It's like, wow, you don't even know what those words mean if you're speaking to someone like you and even coming up with those, let alone saying them.
It doesn't long conversation with me to realize that I'm neither a Nazi nor a communist. But that is a problem. People are using all kinds of words that you have no idea what it is that you're saying. Or not only that, and I don't want to let this go. There are things that people will say to me on social media that I guarantee you, were we face to face, they would never say. Or that if they did say that to my face, that if I slapped that face and left my handprint, that nobody in the room would think that I was in the wrong for doing so. We allow just this horrible, ugly rudeness on these, on these media platforms. And it's not as if we're not real, there is a real person on the other end. And without knowing where somebody is, there are people that are saying such ugly things. Jonathan Haidt sees this, it's destroying young girls. It's just absolute, like their bullies never leave. And, I don't know how we address that, especially with bots who are designed to say horrible things to you. Free.
Right. And then, because bots exist, people can be then accused of bots and kind of deplatformed or canceled or however you want to call it. I was accused of being a Russian bot when the
I've been a
Unity
Russian bot.
movement was trying to get trending, when we got the Articles of Unity. Yeah. So I think we'll probably leave it there. There's probably hours to unpack with you and your background. But this, again, is an example of how we can get out of this mess is that you and I can tell you, would have never agreed on anything back in 2016 because I would not have listened to you. I would not be in a frame of mind to listen to you because you admitted you voted for Hillary. So you're automatically, the other side, the bad side. And I would have not absorbed any of your wisdom, any of your background. You are much smarter than I am, much more studied than I am. And people should really check you out on Twitter or wherever you would like them to check you out because you have some very smart things to say. And it's, we've had this conversation and I think we're both on the same side that, 4 years later, what a difference it makes. And we can have a conversation where we can maybe agree on a few things or disagree on a few things, but most of it we agree on. And that's what we would find if we just spoke to Americans instead
throw words
of
at them,
all the other ways,
and then not listen back.
Yeah.
Well, for anybody who's a volunteer in the Unity movement, 7:00 Central Standard Time, we start talking on Slack on the Uniting People channel, and I've had conversations with people who were very much on the right. A couple of weeks ago, I had an amazing conversation with a woman who was part of, a feminist bringing, having that female experience in tech from a generation above me, talking with me being I decided to be a stay-at-home mom. Because, well, I study human development, and what better way than to make 4 of them and raise them to adulthood. But we're able to have uncomfortable conversations, and everybody can listen and chime in and bring that forth. Yeah. And you never know. We've got all kinds of people that come and do that. So definitely come and be a part of those conversations and help us figure out how to expand that.
Yep.
And then I'm on Twitter, J Hitchcock 99 on Twitter. I'm Janice Hitchcock on Facebook. And I don't have my stuff marked to private because privacy isn't real. Not anymore. You're on a digital device. Come on. you allow people. You clicked a button, yeah.
But I clicked a button that said private.
Not private, to remind myself that once it's released into this space, it is just in this space forever.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And if you're not in our Slack channel to join that Uniting People channel, then you have to sign up at articlesofunity.org, and you'll be given the invite to Slack. So there's that. We'll put all your bio information, as much of it as we can fit in the YouTube description.
And who knows? Maybe I'll get more mouthy on YouTube, or I'll be back here or be on other podcasts. I'm an introvert. I'm very comfortable in my room, in my space, but I think that my silence on these issues is part of the problem. And so I am putting myself out there because it's going to take millions of us to get out of this mess we've made.
Yeah. Agreed. So thank you so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure. Right. And with that, we'll sign off, and we'll see everyone next time. Thanks, Janice. Thanks for tuning in. For more conversations and content like this, be sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you prefer: Apple, Google, Spotify, etc. If you prefer to consume your podcasts in video format, you'll find full episodes and clips on YouTube. Follow the UnityNow podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram by clicking the links in the description below, and be sure to sign up and get involved at articlesofunity.org.